If you're writing a query letter to land a literary agent for your book, these are the top 5 mistakes that you need to avoid. I have advised countless writers on their query letters, really smart writers working on amazing books, and I have seen these mistakes pop up over and over. And I'm not talking about like the obvious ones, like don't misspell the agent's name. No, I'm talking about mistakes that a lot of writers don't know about that might be making agents throw your query letter in the trash without even reviewing your first pages. And if we haven't met already, hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a young adult author and mom based in Brooklyn, and my debut novel, We Ship It, came out last year with HarperCollins, and I landed 8 literary agent offers for my first book. So since then, I've advised a ton of writers on how to land an agent. And it's sort of my thing to make free resources, so check out the description below to grab a free copy of my query letter toolkit. So before I get into what these top 5 mistakes are, I just want to talk for a moment about why your query letter is so important. Because I think that a lot of writers are spending the wrong ratio of time on their book and query letter. Like they might be spending years and years of their lives writing this amazing book, and then they just throw together a query letter and send it out to agents because we know how amazing our stories are. But we don't realize what it's actually like to be in an agent's shoes. A lot of them are getting hundreds of query letters a week, and so they are using heuristics, which are mental shortcuts, to figure out which query letters to ignore so that they have more time to focus on the query letters that look really promising. So you might have an amazing, amazing book, but if there's one little aspect about your query letter that sends a bad signal to an agent, they might not even finish reading it. And I think that a huge mistake that writers make is that we sort of think agents are mind readers, like they just know how amazing our book is, because we know that in our heads. And we spent all of these years writing this fantastic story, and we just think, here, agent, like you are so lucky to have this. You're gonna see immediately how good it is. It's as if we've like worked on this painting for years and years and we're dropping it on their desks. But a book is not a painting. So your query letter is your business pitch for your book. I go a lot more into depth in this in my free masterclass. Check out the description below for a link to that. But you really, really want to spend a good amount of time getting this letter right. All right, so let's go into the top 5 mistakes and how you can avoid them. Okay, so the mistake I see the most often is the word count is too high. So I know a lot of writers think, ooh, but I need all of these aspects and the story needs all of these words, and that an agent will understand how great your story is and help you to cut it down or split it into multiple books, or just ignore the general word count guidelines and just send your book to editors who will publish it as is because it's just so, so good. And I'm sure it is really good, but here's the thing. Agents and publishers play it safe. And so there are standard word counts per genre, and there's a lot of different calculations that go into this. But in general, they tend to publish books within those standard word counts. So this just takes a quick Google search, just look up what that standard word count is, and really, really try to use critique partners or developmental editors to help you get your book down to meet that word count. Because if you send a query letter to an agent and you tell them you're writing a 250,000 word fantasy novel, they might not read any further because that's just sending a signal that you are a newer writer. And I know a lot of writers are like, oh, but there are exceptions, Lord of the Rings, etc., etc. But a lot of the exceptions are older or they're more established writers. And the truth is, getting a literary agent is super, super hard. It's maybe 1% of writers who do. So if you are now trying to be an exception to the rule, instead of 1% being your odds, now your odds might be like 1 in 100,000. I don't want that for you. I want you to get your story out into the world. So look up the standard word count and do the editing that you need to do to make sure that your book fits within that word count. Next up, so if you are writing a series, and this is something that I didn't know about for a while, and I feel like a lot of writers don't know, but they will query agents and say, this is the first book in a series. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to definitely get your query letter thrown out, but once again, it's just a signal that you are a newer writer. So the fix to this is that you want to say, this is a standalone book with series potential. And the reason for this is because agents have to pitch your book to editors. And an editor very rarely is going to pick up a full series because they don't even know if people are going to read and buy your first book. So before they order that series, they want to see how your first book sells. So they need to make sure it has standalone potential, that it wraps up and concludes in a way that is satisfying for the reader, even if there are still like some bits and pieces that are unresolved and that pave the way for a next book, but we still want to make sure that it could stand alone. So once again, do the editing that you need to do to make it stand alone and pitch it as standalone. You don't have to do this, but once again, it just makes your odds a lot harder in an already difficult world if you pitch your book as a series. All right, next, this is another really common mistake that I see, and I totally understand why it happens. And this is that writers comp their books to best-selling books or to really old best-selling books, like I'm going to be the next Harry Potter or I'm going to be the next Divergent. And it of course makes sense, the reason that we do this, right? We know these books well, we love them, they inspired us to become writers and to write our book. And we also think, why wouldn't an agent want to be sending out the next Divergent, right? Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? But now putting ourselves in the agent's shoes, they get letter after letter after letter that are using those same exact books as comps. So once again, agents are using these mental shortcuts to figure out which query letters send off signals that these are newer, less experienced writers, and they may end up ignoring those because they only have a limited amount of time to focus on a few letters from their slush pile. So if you are using these like household names as comps, it's also sending a signal to the agent that you might not be that well read or that familiar with your market. So you really want to do your homework and find comps that are newer. They can be popular, but ideally not like total household names. All right, next up, you want to make sure to personalize your query letter. Now, I think a lot of writers just think it's a numbers game. Let's send this out to a ton of agents, and some are just going to sit and read it and realize how great your story is. But once again, agents are using those shortcuts. They want to make sure that you've done your homework, learned more about them, and can tell them why they are the right fit for your story. So this doesn't take that much time. Check out the agent on websites like Manuscript Wishlist and spend a little time just writing a line or two about why they're a good fit for your book. And also, don't overdo this like I did. Like, this personalization isn't going to magically get an agent to want to represent you. I spent maybe a year on one of my personalizations. Like, I had this tweet saved and it had this really specific part of my book in it, and I responded to that agent, and then I saved a screenshot, and then I probably wrote an entire paragraph to the agent about why he was my dream agent and all the books he represented. Anyway, long story short, I'd never heard back from him. So it's not worth your time to go that far. This is more like a checkbox. Like, an agent sees it and already you are rising above maybe half of the queries that they're receiving, and that's getting you on to the next stage of them actually reading your query letter. But I think it's very rare that that personalization is going to do anything more than that. All right, and finally, you want to make sure that your hook isn't too long. Now, in general, the hook, which is the part of your query letter that actually explains and pitches your book, and that's the part that hooks agents, which is why it's called the hook. So in general, you want this around 150 to 200 words. 250, great. 300, maybe, but try to get it around 200 words. Now, fewer words can also work as well, but in general, I'd say most successful query letters are around 150 to 225 or 250 words. And this is a real exercise in your ability to understand how to sell a commercial book, because your hook is very similar to the blurb you'd find on the back cover of a book. So the agent really wants to make sure that you understand how to write and pitch a commercial book. They don't want every single detail about your story. I think a lot of writers think, oh, there are so many great things, and the more I pack into the query, the more excited the agent is going to be. But often this leads to the opposite. It's just like overload in the agent's brain, and just the length of it, they can just look at in 1 second and say, that's a greener writer, I'm going to move on to the next query in my slush pile. So do a ton of editing, find critique partners, check out my resources below for advice on how to find them, work with a developmental editor maybe, but just make sure that you write a really strong hook and that it fits within around 150 to 250 words. So if you follow all of this advice, your query letter now stands a much better chance of getting an agent's attention and getting you on to the next part of the process, which is the agent requesting your full manuscript. And if you want more advice on query letter writing, make sure to check out my free masterclass linked below or my online course, Query Bootcamp. Best of luck to you. I really hope this helps to get your story out into the world.